It was March 1988, and the entertainment world was buzzing with news that seemed impossible. The Rat Pack was reuniting. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and Dean Martin, three legends who defined an era, were embarking on what promoters called the Ultimate Event Tour. 40 cities, sold-out arenas, a final goodbye to fans who'd loved them for decades. But what the world didn't know was that Dean Martin was dying inside. Just 11 months earlier, on March 21, 1987, Dean's oldest son, Dean Paul Martin, had been killed when his F-4 Phantom jet crashed into Mount San Gorgonio during a routine military training flight. Dean Paul was 35 years old, a talented actor, a professional tennis player, and a captain in the California Air National Guard. He was everything a father could be proud of: handsome, accomplished, driven. Dean had called him his golden boy. The crash investigators said Dean Paul had lost spatial orientation while climbing through cloud layers during a snowstorm. The jet, traveling at over 500 miles per hour, slammed into the mountain inverted. Dean Paul and his weapons officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, died instantly. It took search teams 6 days to find the wreckage. Dean Martin had lived through a lot in his 70 years. He'd grown up poor, the son of Italian immigrants in a tough Ohio steel town. He'd been a boxer, a card dealer, a bootlegger. He'd conquered Hollywood, Las Vegas, television, and the music charts. He'd survived the end of his partnership with Jerry Lewis, 3 divorces, and the changing tastes of American entertainment. But losing his son broke something in him that could never be repaired. In the months after Dean Paul's death, Dean withdrew from public life. Friends who visited him at his Beverly Hills home said he'd become a ghost of himself. He stopped going out. He stopped playing golf, which had been his favorite escape. Most days, he sat alone in his house, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and staring at photographs of his son. Paul Anka, a close friend, later said, after that event in his life, things really changed. That death was a huge turning point. Frank watched his friend disappear into grief and knew he had to do something. Frank had known Dean since the 1950s. They'd made movies together, performed together in Las Vegas, navigated the highs and lows of fame side by side. Frank understood Dean in a way few people did, and he knew that sitting alone in that house was killing Dean just as surely as the grief was. In late 1987, Frank proposed an idea, a reunion tour. Not a long one, just a few months, 40 shows, a chance to get back on stage and remember why they'd loved performing in the first place. Frank positioned it as a favor to Sammy Davis Jr., who needed the money and the exposure. But really, it was for Dean. Frank hoped that the music, the audiences, the camaraderie would pull Dean out of the darkness. Dean initially said no. "I can't do it, Frank," he told Sinatra during one phone call. "I can't stand up there and pretend everything's okay." "Nobody's asking you to pretend. Just come out, sing a few songs, and let people see you. That's all. We'll handle the rest." After weeks of persuasion, Dean finally agreed. The tour was announced in January 1988, with the first show scheduled on March 13th at the Oakland Coliseum Arena. Ticket sales exploded. Fans who'd never seen the Rat Pack perform together rushed to buy seats. This would be history, a final chance to see 3 legends share a stage. But from the very first rehearsal, it was clear something was wrong. Dean showed up late to the first practice session in Los Angeles. When he walked into the rehearsal space, Sammy and Frank both noticed how much weight he'd lost. His famous smile was gone, replaced by a hollow, distant expression. His eyes, which once had been full of mischief and warmth, looked empty. "You okay, Pally?" Frank asked quietly. "I'm fine," Dean said. But he wasn't fine, and everyone in the room knew it. During rehearsals, Dean struggled to remember lyrics to songs he'd sung thousands of times. He missed cues, his timing was off, and worst of all, the effortless charm that had defined his performances for 40 years was completely absent.
He looked like a man going through the motions because he'd been asked to, not because he wanted to.
The musical director, Bill Miller, pulled Frank aside after the second rehearsal. "Frank, I don't think he's ready for this." "He will be," Frank insisted. "He just needs to get back in the rhythm." But Frank was wrong. The tour opened on March 13, 1988, in Oakland. The arena was packed with 15,000 fans who'd paid top dollar to see their heroes one more time. The energy in the building was electric. When Frank and Sammy walked out on stage to thunderous applause, it felt like 1960 all over again, the glory days of the Rat Pack, when these three men had ruled Las Vegas and made cool a way of life. Then Dean walked out. The applause was deafening, but Dean barely acknowledged it. He walked to his microphone, gave a small wave, and waited for the band to start. Frank and Sammy exchanged worried glances, but the show had to go on. Dean sang "Everybody Loves Somebody." His voice was rough, strained, nothing like the smooth velvet tones that had defined his career, but he made it through the song. The audience applauded warmly, willing to forgive the rough edges, because this was Dean Martin, and just seeing him was enough. He sang "That's Amore." Halfway through, he seemed to lose his place in the lyrics. He stopped, smiled awkwardly, and said, "Sorry, folks, old age." The audience laughed, thinking it was part of the act, but Frank and Sammy knew better. Then Dean started his third song, "Memories Are Made of This." He got through the first verse, then the second, and then, as he reached the chorus, something happened. Dean stopped singing mid-line. He just stopped. The orchestra kept playing for a few bars before trailing off into confused silence. Dean stood at the microphone, frozen, staring out at the audience, but not really seeing them. Frank walked over quickly. "You okay, Pally?" he asked, his hand on Dean's shoulder. Dean turned to look at Frank, and for the first time, Frank saw tears in his old friend's eyes. "I can't do this, Frank," he said quietly. His microphone was still on, so the entire arena heard him. "I can't." And then Dean Martin walked off the stage. The audience sat in stunned silence. Frank and Sammy tried to recover, launching into an improvised duet, but the magic was gone. Everyone in that arena knew they'd just witnessed something heartbreaking, a legend breaking down in front of 15,000 people. Backstage, Dean's road manager found him sitting in his dressing room, still in his tuxedo, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. "Dean, what happened out there?" Dean didn't answer right away. He just stared at a photograph he'd taped to his dressing room mirror, a picture of Dean Paul in his Air Force uniform, smiling, full of life. "I was singing 'Memories Are Made of This,'" Dean finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and all I could think about was him. Every memory I have, he's in it, and now he's gone, and I'm up there singing about memories like they're supposed to make me happy, but they don't. They kill me." He took a long drag on his cigarette. "I thought I could do this. Frank thought getting back on stage would help, but it doesn't help. Nothing helps. Every time I open my mouth to sing, all I hear is silence where my son should be." The road manager didn't know what to say. What could anyone say? Dean looked up at him. "Tell Frank I'm sorry. Tell him I can't finish the tour. I can't." Frank tried to change Dean's mind. He went to Dean's hotel room that night and spent 3 hours talking to his friend, pleading with him to reconsider. "We can slow down the schedule. We can do fewer shows, whatever you need." But Dean had made up his mind. "You and Sammy finish the tour. You don't need me. You never did." "That's not true, and you know it," Frank said, his voice cracking with emotion. Dean managed a sad smile. We were brothers, Frank, not by blood, but by choice. But right now, I can't be anyone's brother. I can't be anyone's friend. I can barely be myself." Frank hugged Dean then, something he rarely did, even with his closest friends. "I love you, you know that?" Frank said. "I know," Dean replied. "I love you too. But I gotta go home." The next morning, Dean Martin flew back to Los Angeles. He never performed on a public stage again. The tour continued as the ultimate event, with Liza Minnelli replacing Dean. Frank and Sammy did their best to honor their absent friend, occasionally making gentle references to Dino and how much they missed him. But it wasn't the same. The tour that was supposed to be a celebration of three legends became instead a reminder that time and grief spare no one. Sammy Davis Jr. was diagnosed with throat cancer during the tour and died in May 1990. At Sammy's funeral, Dean attended but stood in the back, unwilling to draw attention to himself. After the tour, Dean spent his remaining years in almost complete isolation. He'd go to the same restaurant, Da Vinci, in Beverly Hills, and eat alone, always wearing the same outfit, navy blue pants and a light blue shirt. The staff knew to seat him at his regular table and leave him alone unless he needed something. Journalists and fans occasionally spotted him. He would always say, "I'll be back on that stage one day. You'll see me," recalled William Keck, a reporter who saw Dean regularly during those years. But he was done. Dean's daughter Deanna later said that her father never truly recovered from Dean Paul's death. "Dad and Dean Paul had a special bond," she said. "After the crash, it was like looking at a candle without a flame. He was physically there, but the light had gone out." Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, at his home in Beverly Hills. He was 78 years old. The official cause was acute respiratory failure from emphysema, the result of a lifetime of heavy smoking. But those who knew him best understood that he'd really died years earlier, on that mountain in California where his son's plane had crashed.
When news of Dean's death reached Frank Sinatra, Frank was too ill to attend the funeral. He was devastated. The man who'd orchestrated reunions, who'd always known how to fix things, hadn't been able to save his friend from grief. At Dean's funeral, nearly 200 people gathered to say goodbye. Jerry Lewis attended, standing quietly in the back. Fighter jets flew overhead in the missing man formation, a tribute to Dean Paul, whose death had ultimately claimed his father, too. Rosemary Clooney, one of Dean's oldest friends, sang "Everybody Loves Somebody" a cappella. Her voice broke multiple times during the song, but she made it through. In that moment, everyone in attendance understood that they weren't just mourning Dean Martin, the entertainer. They were mourning a father who'd loved his son so much that he couldn't survive losing him. In Dean's personal safe, his daughter Deanna found something after his death, a folder containing every letter, every card, every photograph related to Dean Paul. There were newspaper clippings about the crash, the search efforts, the funeral. There were Dean Paul's baby pictures, his school photos, pictures of him in his Air Force uniform. And there was a hand-written note from Dean that simply said, "My golden boy, I'll see you soon." The story of Dean Martin's final tour reminds us that fame and talent and success mean nothing when you lose the person you love most. It reminds us that grief doesn't care about your legacy, your bank account, or how many millions of people adore you. Grief is the price we pay for love, and sometimes that price is everything we have left. Dean Martin made the world laugh for 50 years. He sang songs that became the soundtrack of romance for generations. He embodied cool in a way that's never been matched. But in the end, all of that couldn't save him from the unbearable weight of losing his son. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some pain can't be healed by music, friendship, or time. Sometimes all we can do is honor the memory of those who carried that pain with as much grace as they could manage, and understand that the greatest performances aren't always the ones that end with applause. Dean Martin walked off that stage in Oakland because he was being honest. He couldn't pretend anymore. And maybe, in a world that often demands we hide our pain behind smiles and songs, that final moment of honesty was the bravest thing he ever did. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Share this with someone who understands that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we're broken. Have you ever experienced a loss that changed you forever? Let us know in the comments, and remember to ring that notification bell for more stories about the real people behind the legends.